Heard of Q broadcast? It's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get access to every channel you could ever want, including HBO, Cinemax, and Stars. And the best part? There are no contracts, no hidden fees, and you're free to cancel anytime. With Q Broadcast, you can enjoy streaming live TV, movies, and top series on up to 5 devices at once. Whether you're at home or on the go, Q Broadcast makes sure your entertainment is always at your fingertips. Imagine being able to watch all your favorite channels from anywhere, anytime, without any restrictions. We're talking about thousands of movies, hundreds of TV series, and a huge library of live channels, all in one place. And don't forget video on demand and pay-per-view events. Those are included at no extra cost, so you'll never miss a big event again. Now, take a second and think about your current cable bill. You're probably paying anywhere between $100 and $300 every month, locked into long-term contracts and hit with surprise rate increases. With Q Broadcast, that's a thing of the past. It's just $60 a month. No contracts, no extra fees, no hidden costs, and no price hikes. Why juggle multiple subscriptions like Netflix, Hulu, and cable when Q Broadcast gives you everything you need in one convenient package? People everywhere are switching to Q Broadcast, saving money and getting more content than ever before. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and sign up for Q Broadcast today. Just $60 a month, no contracts, no hidden fees. It's time to take control of your entertainment and start streaming smarter.
We live in a world where men are told it's harmless. It's just entertainment. But let's stop lying to ourselves. Pornography destroys. It weakens your spirit. It dulls your drive. And it robs you of what real intimacy is supposed to be. Every click is a step away from the man you're supposed to be. We can't call ourselves leaders if we are slaves to a screen.
As someone that is prior service, I know all about discipline. And discipline isn't out there, it's within your mind. Porn rewires your brain, weakens your will, wrecks all of your relationships. It doesn't just stay on a screen, it invades your marriage, your confidence, and your actual purpose. As men, if we don't learn to discipline ourselves, we'll be ruled by our impulses. Now, it is time to stand up and take control before this silent war takes more than you're willing to lose.
Real men don't hide in the shadows of shame. We step up and we protect what's ours. We fight for our wives and kids, our own hearts. Twitter isn't just an app, it's a weapon. It's a tool used to break free and start living like the man that you're meant to be. The battle's here and it starts with you. You can stop living in shame and you can break free today.
Heard of Q Broadcast? It's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better.
Here at the Anomic Age, we know that these times of uncertainty are stressful. It is incumbent upon all of us to put our fears first and bow down to government tyranny. Gone are the days of freely leaving your home, working, and social interactions. In exchange for safety, we will trade liberty. At the Anomic Age, we understand. However, just in case you want to get off your knees and stop being a sniveling coward, check out the John Age Project at anomicage.com.
Meet Ann Morrissey, who is here with her daughter, Dareth. Dareth is 17 years old. Mrs. Morrissey, I don't have to tell you that most parents would be extremely depressed if their daughter came home one day looking like this? I assume that was your response shock, anger, depression? What was it?
I was extremely angry. I really went bananas.
Yeah, how old was she when this happened?
Possibly 13, 14 years old.
We're talking like it's a disease, and
Well,
yeah. How did she explain it to you, Mrs. Morrison?
there was very poor communication until we went into counseling. And it almost broke up our family. But through counseling and Serena, I can understand it better.
What do you understand?
That she feels like she doesn't want to be like everyone else, and she wants to be her own person. And through the dress code and her lifestyle, she's expressing this. It doesn't conform with our rules, but we're learning to cope, and it's a very, very difficult thing. Extremely difficult.
Dareth, let's let you talk for yourself. You're from Long Beach, California.
I just can't handle being like everybody else because that's what everybody else wants, you know. Just because somebody else does something does not mean that I have to do it. You know, I have my own morals and ideals, and I go by them.
Are you drug-free, Dareth?
Yes, I am.
Is this a political statement then? Do you have some misgiving about the society that you see?
Yeah, there's a lot of problems, you know. A lot of the people are really aware of what's going on, you know, and I don't like it, you know. There's a lot of problems.
What?
I don't like the way society is based.
What bothers you? Give us some of the misgivings you have.
The rich, the poor, the people starving, the wars, you know. Why can't, you know, everybody just get along and just live their life?
Here at the Anomic Age, we know that these times of uncertainty are stressful. It is incumbent upon all of us to put our fears first.
You know something is wrong, and it's time to stand up. You are listening to The John Age Show.
Trust no one. Trust no one. Trust no one.
You found it. You're here. You're headlong down the runaway train that is the Anomic Age, and I'm your host, John Age. Happy to be back with you once again, coming at you in the not-so-wee hours of the PM today. We got a great show. We got Matthew Ehret with us today to get into a cornucopia of stuff, an amazing amount of information. But before we do, please check out anomicage.com. It's where you can find all things me, all the shows, the shortened sort of information breakdown segments that I put out several times a week, as well as the full Monty here as you are listening to us now with our guests. Always recommend paypal.me/anomicage, patreon.com/anomicage as well. They got a lightning link below that if you are so inclined to become a patron or sort of donate by almost any means necessary. You can do that at anomicage.com. Other good stuff, we got the free iPhone app, free Android app. Subscribe by email link. I always say that's the best one to hit because, you know, sometimes there's issues with the notifications coming through on the different apps, but subscribe by email is like the default, easiest, old tech way to do it. And if you don't like it, you can always just hit unsubscribe and you are thrown to the netherworld and unsubscribe from the subscribe by email link. Other stuff we got there at the bottom. You can sign up for the free newsletter as well. All right, enough of that. If you've not already seen our guest info, Matthew Ehret is a journalist and co-founder of the Rising Tide Foundation. He's the editor-in-chief of Canadian Patriot Review, senior fellow at the American University of Moscow and host of the Great Game on Rogue News. Excuse me. So I got his major links there. CanadianPatriot.org. That's what you're seeing on your screen. And the other foundation, Rising Tide Foundation. Both of those, a wealth of knowledge and information. Can't recommend them enough. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us today, sir.
Thank you very much for having me on, John.
Definitely. I'm excited to talk to you. I was already excited to talk to you, but just sort of kicking it around a little bit before the show. It's wonderful to get into some of this stuff. And it's kind of odd. I mean, you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes I come in here thinking we're going to cover just this one topic, and good grief, man, that little sidebar has got me pumped to talk about a bunch of other stuff too. But I guess we can sort of start at the beginning here. I was sort of trying to connect some dots between how America, and I'll just say the West, as far as, America, Canada, the New World, if you will, can't seem to sort of sever ties with jolly old England. You'd think that 1776 thing would have done it, but we're a week and a half removed from the coronation of Charles, and that was just the in vogue news all over the place. And I mean, I did several shows on it, just going, why do we care? It's a costume party. You got all the pomp and circumstance and the regalia. I mean, it looked like a Disney movie out there, and here we are at 2023. Still sort of groveling at the crown, or at least it appears that way sometimes.
It's definitely a weird phenomenon for a lot of people who thought that they left, that this is like an archaic relic of medieval times long past. It was a bit of a weird thing to be reminded that, I mean, and it's the first time we've seen something like this in over 70 years. Most people haven't lived in a world that saw the coronation of the heir to the crown of the British Empire. And I say British Empire, not British Commonwealth, for a reason, because in my research in the substance of the 4-volume Untold History of Canada series, as well as the Clash of the Two Americas 4-volume book series, I try to make the point, and I think I do it fairly well, that the idea that the British Empire disappeared and then became simply the American Empire after World War II, that is a complete mythology. You could look at a map today of the British Commonwealth, which has the crown sort of centered at the apex of a pyramid.
Why do people think it's so rare that they don't have to be on camera?
It occupies about 52 countries that make up the Commonwealth, about 22% of the world's territory. 2.6 billion people live in British Commonwealth territory. The primary zones of drug money laundering occur in British Cayman Islands, British offshore tax havens. You have the City of London as the financial center of the world, which it was during the same time of the American Revolution 250 years ago. That was still the center of what the British Empire was a banker's empire. The crown itself is a structure which is more than the individual that happens to occupy that seat as one inbred, progeny of a couple of cousins, which is always the case. It's a very inbred structure, but it's not the individual. The crown itself is the world's biggest landowner internationally, with 6.6 billion acres of land under the possession of the crown corporations amongst every so-called colony or dominion of the empire. Crown corporations in Canada, which are so-called government corporations, or in Australia or New Zealand, they're under the legal ownership of the crown. So I mean, it's so much more complex as a machinery of controls than people realize. It is very active today, as it always was, and I think that this conversation that we're going to have is going to be really useful, because it's going to redefine not only what is this deep state thing that people have come to understand as a concept in recent years, especially with the entire ingrained structure that went to work to undermine the presidency of Donald Trump for 4 straight years. I mean, there's something really, really interconnected that went to work, and it became very difficult for people to pretend it didn't exist. But it also gives us a better appreciation for what was it that oversaw the murder of Bobby Kennedy in '68, or Martin Luther King Jr., which were openly acknowledged in the Church Committee hearings in 1975 as being conducted by agencies of the U.S. government itself. It wasn't lone gunmen, and this is an actual official congressional committee which released their findings in 1975-76 over the CIA FBI collusion in the cover-up and murder of JFK, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy. What is it that oversaw the take? What was it that saw the killing of Lincoln? What about McKinley? What about Garfield? What about Warren Harding, who died after just 2 years fighting the League of Nations in 1923? What about Roosevelt, who was actually fighting against this entire thing in 1945, who died just a few months into his last presidency? What took over? So I think it'll help to sort of redefine what is this thing that has been sort of in the heart as a fifth column within America since 1776, which is tied to some of the insane crap we just saw on TV last week with the $100 million expenditure crowning this creature as King Charles III. Just what is this thing, and what was the empire that the American revolutionaries fought against? Because it wasn't just a bunch of redcoats and funny hats that were trying to preserve, British dominion. It was so much more than that, which has been dumbed down and simplified, so people don't know what the battle was of the 19th or 18th centuries. They just don't know. And thus they can't know what shaped the 20th century, what shaped the Cold War, what took over, what funded Hitler, how did, what oversaw the murder of these great presidents, what oversaw things like 9/11. What about, today's situation? They just can't know because this context has been removed from our psyche. So yeah, this is something we can talk about any part of this as you'd like.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's funny because so many people, and I think rightfully so, will point to that the Nazi empire never really left. It just sort of reculminated or transformed. But I think, going back to your point, the British Empire never left. That sort of old ghost was never exercised. It just sort of resurrected itself here in the U.S. and changed brands. I mean, so often, I kind of go back to Bernays quite often, but I think rebranding is kind of the crux of what we see so many times again and again, where we think, oh boy, that's over with. Whoo, that's gone. And then you just see sort of the rebranding pop up, in a couple years. Again and again, it's that rebranding thing. People don't realize, oh, it's a new Tide. Well, it's really old Tide. They just put a different box top on there.
Yeah, well said, man. No, exactly. It's just like you had the Nazi, what are called the Nazi stay-behinds, right, of Operation Gladio, which were just absorbed by Allen Dulles and the entire MI6 CIA complex after World War II. Most of the most hardcore of the Nazis and Italian fascists were never punished. They were never reconstructed. They were just put immediately back to work doing the exact same thing they were doing under Hitler, but now under new management, and in the context of an artificial Manichaean dualism that was imposed onto humanity, turning the allied nations who fought so closely to stop the fascist Hitler project from succeeding and being the basis of a new world order back throughout the 1940s, which I'm referring specifically right now to the U.S., China, Russia alliance. Those three nations together provided the vital living force that allowed for the putting down of the Wall Street, London financed fascist machinery that was cultivated throughout the 1920s, especially into the 1930s. Without the support of JP Morgan, without the support of the Bank of England, without the support of the City of London, as well as the Rockefeller machine and Standard Oil and the DuPont complex, there could not have been the rise of a Nazi machinery. Couldn't have happened. The entire, and this is something which again has been obscured from our history books, obviously. It makes sense when you look at, well, who are the patrons of many of the modern universities and history writers who get paid and who get published and who set curriculums. I mean, you'll find the same connections to the money bags that brought us fascism in the first place. So the Russia, China, U.S. alliance was key in making this New World Order attempt fail. Russia lost 25 million of their people. China lost 10 million of their people in that fight. Russia absorbed something like 92% of the most vicious killers of the Wehrmacht. That was a fight that was primarily taken up by the Russians. The Japanese war machine was also supported, provided for massive support for decades by the British Empire.
Hmm.
American nationalists and patriots who were working with Warren Harding even had set up things like War Plan Red and War Plan Orange in the 1920s as a preparation for war with both Japan and Britain, which was recognized by these American patriots around Warren Harding as being at the heart of the attempt at a fascist world government, which is why the British Empire, not Woodrow Wilson, but actually the Round Table movement of the heirs of Cecil Rhodes, like Lord Milner, who had taken over the control of Britain, were the architects of the League of Nations at the same time to replace sovereign nation states in the wake of World War One. And that was the whole idea of World War One was a war that was done to impose shock therapy and trauma onto the world citizenry as a way to break our will and convince us that if we just got rid of nation states and created a new supranational government of scientific engineers, enlightened managers of the world, we would never have wars again, and there'd be somehow some big kumbaya. Now, some people did believe in that Kool-Aid because they were so psychologically traumatized. Other people who were smarter, and here I'm referring to those I was just alluding to around Warren Harding, the last Lincoln Republican of the 20th century. They were much smarter, and they recognized that this was a giant trap run by London. And again, Warren Harding did die the way we know he did, through oyster poisoning on a train in coming back from Alaska. That was weird.
Wow.
No autopsy, but we do know that all serious resistance to this world government agenda disappeared as the J.P. Morgan, Carnegie Mellon complex took control of the U.S. administration, giving rise to the bubbles of the 1920s. The whole bubble economy of easy money, roaring 20s speculation with money that didn't exist, gambling with other people's savings. That created these bubbles that were then controlled in a demolition that occurred on a certain given coordinated moment in 1929, very similar to a process that we're experiencing today, except today the bubbles are much bigger, but in principle it's the same thing. And just like in 29, all that happened was everybody who was in the know sold, for pennies on the dollar, or no, they sold their stocks early, because they knew that the broker call loans were going to be called in at the same moment, and all of these stockbrokers who had basically taken out loans that they couldn't afford to pay back, all of a sudden were expected to pay back those loans. That resulted in massive defaults and a chain of reaction that became what we call today the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. And then all of those in the J.P. Morgan preferred clients list, who were also the same assholes who were funding fascism as a new form of social management across Europe and even in North America and in Canada. They were able to buy up for pennies on the dollar the real estate, the defaulted farms that had been foreclosed upon. There was the biggest wealth transfer in history up until the days of Vanguard and BlackRock that we had seen in a coordinated fashion, right? And again, they were always promoting with things like Henry Luce's Time magazine, the idea that fascism would be the miracle economic solution that would put bread back on your table and help you feed your family again. If you just give up your stupid liberties that are enshrined in your Constitution, just let go of that. And you had Nazi parades in New York. You had 30,000 people in Madison Square Garden with Nazi rallies, putting pictures of George Washington and the swastika together, saying this is the key to our solution. And these are the same groups that tried to kill Franklin Roosevelt in 1933. With the Freemasonic, assassin that was deployed to shoot Roosevelt, ended up accidentally shooting Mayor Cermak standing next to Roosevelt from Chicago, and he died. And then they organized the business plot, right, with the whole J.P. Morgan thing that hired Smedley Butler, the four-star general, that luckily blew the whistle and exposed this entire fascist complex in America that wanted to install him as a puppet dictator. And he, people can YouTube his speech and listen to it. But these groups were never punished in Nuremberg. They were never, the leading Nazis, like I said, were never punished. They were absorbed by these same financiers who went on to rebrand, as you just pointed out, their entire strategy. They still kept eugenics, the scientific religion of the Nazi machine, sponsored by Rockefeller Foundation funding and Macy Foundation funding, since the 1907, when they started, passing eugenics laws in the United States, which did this way before Hitler, or in Canada, and we had 30 U.S. states that had adopted Rockefeller-funded eugenics laws to sterilize the unfit in America before Hitler even did it And the same thing in Canada, in Alberta, BC, we're sterilizing like 8,000 people for being genetically unfit to procreate, based on this idea of a statistical science that, look, if you're this is how the eugenics went. Or for those who don't know, eugenics was, and I'm sorry for rambling, but
you're spot on. I love it.
The idea was, look, if your father and your grandfather had low IQs or were maybe had criminal records, statistically the chances were that your kids, your grandkids, and your unborn grandchildren would also statistically likely also have low IQs or be criminally inclined, ignoring all other factors that might be causing criminality or low IQs, just ignoring any of the actual sociological, economic injustices that happens when you live under a system of empire. Ignoring all of that, they just tried to reduce everything to some genetic characteristic, some material genetic trait, and then use that to then sterilize people who were deemed unfit by expert panels. And Hitler did this very aggressively. He really warmly embraced that. The science was never German. It wasn't American. It was a British science run by people like Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's cousin, and a whole coterie of inbred, ironically, inbred intermarrying oligarchical families in London, which, or in the broader Europe, I would say even, that promoted this sort of thing to try to justify the idea that society should, to be scientifically managed, organized around the better breeds, the hereditary more fit, that then can manage the undermention, the untermenschen. You have the Ubermenschen and the Untermenschen, the overhumans and the underhumans. And the underhumans have to remain sort of in a state of being as satisfied with their slavery as humanly possible through whatever techniques can be generated, either keep them hungry and starving, but under firm control as a completely enslaved society. And if they have a taste for democracy, try to corrupt them by giving them sensual pleasure and calling that freedom. And that way they won't realize that their freedoms are being taken away because they're being given, like Edward Bernays was a real good expert at that. They're being given hedonistic pleasures to distract them from the reality that their world is becoming taken over by a tyrannical masterclass that ultimately wants to kill them. So you got these different techniques, but ultimately it's just that. And eugenics, just to end my little rant, it didn't disappear. But when you look at people like Julian Huxley, the co-founder of UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, this guy was a president of the British Eugenics Society. At the same time as he was not only setting up UNESCO, calling for in its founding manifesto in 1946, he openly calls for focusing on the youth being born after World War II, what we today call the baby boomers, and saying that this is the generation that we have to now focus on to play the long game, because basically Hitler made the queen of all sciences, eugenics, which he calls the science of all sciences. He made it an unthinkable thing for most people who saw the ugly ramifications of what this looks like when done in an honest way by a government that believes it. So he says we have to make the unthinkable once again become thinkable by giving eugenics a new costume, but maintaining the same effects. So if you look at, well, what were those effects? Well, the very term transhumanism that today people have come to think more seriously about, because things like Davos, the transhumanist agenda of creatures floating around at Davos has become difficult to ignore. It's based upon the same fundamental idea of a master class of superhumans who are the corporate elite of Davos, who will somehow control the levers of genetic manipulation of CRISPR technology and integration of humans and machinery in order to create a new breed of species, synthetic species, as far as they believe. I'm not even saying that this is possible, but I'm saying that they believe it. And who created the term transhumanism? Julian Huxley is the founder, the godfather, who coined the very term transhumanism itself in 1954. He's also the godfather of modern environmentalism. He created the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in 1947. And out of that organization, he then worked with people like Prince Bernhard, the co-founder of the Bilderberger group of globalists that met up every year starting in 1954. He worked with Prince Bernhard, a former Nazi official, and Prince Philip Mountbatten, the father of the current king. And the trio had set up in 1961 the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, which was devoted to creating a fund to give money to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Why? Well, as they outlined themselves in their Morgues Manifesto and in their many writings, the idea was to change the values of the human species. Global behavioral modification around the idea that instead of having the value structure of Judeo-Christian ethics, which presumed that human beings were sacred and that technology and science and progress and leaping over the limits to growth were actually the mandate of humanity to do in opposition to systems of empire that were understood in more sane times to be wired to want to enslave and control the vast majority of the species, which was understood to be an evil system of empire. Those were outdated value structures and idea concepts that had to be superseded by something more modern and relevant to the modern age of the Cold War, which was save nature from humanity, and presume thus, which comes with that barrel of assumptions, that anything human beings do to try to solve problems through scientific and technological progress, building dams, hydroelectric dams, or building great mega projects the way the best of humanity had done over the course of centuries, that was all bad. It's always going to destroy nature and disturb natural ecosystems, which desire to be in their natural state of zero change. So they impose this idea of stasis onto humanity, saying that stasis is good. And anytime humanity changes stasis, we're being bad. And thus, population growth is a problem. We're pollution machines. We're consuming machines. And they ensured that we lost our divine claim, or they wanted to being a species of creation. Because obviously we'll always consume. If you don't consume water and food, you don't do well.
Yeah.
But the thing is, do we put the emphasis upon the consumerism, which is what we were told to do after 1971, is like, now we're in a consumer society age, and to be a good citizen, you had to go to the shopping mall and consume a lot, and that's how to be good. Well, that was never sustainable. That was designed to blow. But you can't consumption is bad. It doesn't mean consumerism is bad or private property is bad. It just means the abuse of it or losing the value of what you place on it is bad. You have to always produce more and create more to justify the consumption. If you just consume and you don't create, well, you're going to be in an atrophying system that will self-implode. So that's where I think that today the modern eugenics effects, even though they don't call it that, are being felt in a variety of ways, both, like I mentioned, on the transhumanist, integrating human beings with machinery or manipulating babies to create CRISPR new babies that fart less or are smaller people, which make them pollute less. Like, these are things that are actually being funded by people like Bill Gates. Or, you've got inversely, you've got the British Eugenics Society, which didn't disappear. It changed its name to become the Galton Institute in 1988, and it's a deep part of the Gavi complex, which I don't know where you're going to stream this, and I don't want to send part of the video, but this is a big part of today's pharmaceutical complex, industrial complex, are the actual leading agencies that didn't disappear, that were promoting eugenics in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, Planned Parenthood being one of many parts of this thing. They just rebranded. They were always working with leading Nazis. NATO itself is a Nazi organization. If you look at it, eight of the heads of the Central European Command of NATO from 1955 to 1973, 8 consecutive heads were former Nazi SS officers. 8.
You can't make this stuff up.
You can't. We didn't. So in that sense, World War II was a victorious battle won against fascist world government freaks, but it wasn't the war to end all wars one that we've been told it was. It's just like the American Revolution was not the end all war of independence that put an end to systems of British Empire fifth colonists in America. It was a successful historic battle which forever transformed the world in a positive way, I believe. But it was not, there was unresolved elements that were like the Nazi stay-behinds. You had the British stay-behinds, always just keeping on sort of an American patriotic front on the surface, but always working to undermine and undo America's accomplishments from within for 260 years now. And Canada has played, unfortunately, a negative role as far as the British monarchy of the North. It's another strange thing that has always been subverting, working with London, working with the traders in Wall Street, who have always been loyal to the city of London since the beginning days of Wall Street in the 1790s. They've always been working to destroy the American experiment from within. And the fact that it still existed today, America's been able to survive a lot of the most crazy operations against it for 260 years, is itself a little bit of a miracle that people don't appreciate as much as what it is.
This might be a weird parallel, but while you were talking about this, I was sort of, connecting all these dots to the patsies that have always been used in assassinations from JFK, RFK, MLK, right on down the line. And it's kind of funny. There's always the patsy. It's the lone gunman. It's the lone nut white guy with a rifle. I'm not making any apologies for the Nazis by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of funny that, everything we think of as like these horrible, and it kind of traces its lineage back to the British. And it's so bizarre, everything you just mentioned as far as the ecology. I had a guest on years ago, Mark Musser, who wrote Nazi Ecology, and he was tracing the Green Movement back to the Nazis, and you just did one better and connected it back to the British. And, looking at all these, again, I always call them famous dead guys, the Huxleys, the Wedgwoods, the Galtons. They were the ones doing this inbreeding freaky eugenics mess. And then they just went, I know what we'll do. We'll just kill everybody except for the chosen few. And you mentioned the, oh my goodness, the Ubermenschen and Untermenschen. And I couldn't help but immediately think of H.G. Wells and the Time Machine with the Morlocks and the Eloi, and we know H.G. Wells just pumping out tons of books that became movies, like the New World Order and just all kinds of stuff that you look at it now and you go, man, that sounds a heck of a lot like, well, today, I don't know. Yeah. There's a lot of connections here with some of these big names into where we are today. It's almost like the rebranding thing again, where they, it was really the British, but there's this patsy in Germany. We're going to work him up. We're going to take him out of prison and he's going to be our front runner for a minute,
Yeah, absolutely, dude. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I was reading a book also a little while ago called How Green Were the Nazis, which seems to take on the same thesis that your former guest had also developed in his book, which is, like people underestimate. They think, oh yeah, okay, Hitler was a vegetarian, and that's just a quirky part of his being, but it had nothing to do with anything else. And I was once a vegetarian. I'm not saying vegetarians are fascists. I'm not saying that. But there was something ideological that was connected to his approach to thinking about ecology and the Nazi policy for ecologism that is disturbingly similar not only to a lot of what we have going on today, but also very much based upon a precedent that was set in London or in Britain. Because if you think about it, first of all, Goering himself was the Minister of Conservation, Forestry and Conservation of Germany. Part of the policy was to extract all of the foreign contaminants of the foliage systems of Germany and the vegetation that was not indigenously German, whatever that means. The other thing was that they wanted to use conservation, but for political objectives. They wanted to reclaim land that, in hindsight, we could see that a lot of the land that they were conserving was actually used to create a militarization program under the cover of forestry conservation programs that people couldn't really quite detect what was going on behind that. The other thing that is important is that these were modeled on precedents set by Britain in their control of India, because in British-controlled India in 1877, there was a crisis where the Indians had organized themselves after a century of humiliation and destruction under British Malthusian population reduction policies. Like there was controlled famines in India for about a century at that point in the 1870s. There was an organized force in India around not only liberating, uniting the Hindus, the Sikhs, the Muslims, all in a common front to kick out the British, but at the same time do it in such a way that involved utilizing national power to promote the investments into infrastructure that would then create abundance in electricity and other things to help India modernize and leap into the modern age, inspired by the best examples set by Lincoln's America, Lincoln's USA, that was beginning to be seen as a role model for other poor countries that had been abused to also follow. You saying that, look, if America was able to develop so amazingly, even despite a civil war, by the use of protectionism, state banking, instead of having private central bankers, but having a national bank emit productive credit for big projects, and utilizing protectionism to block the dumping of cheap goods that would undercut and destroy your local emerging, farms and businesses. If that worked so well for America, why can't we do it in Japan, in Germany, in France, in Russia? Everyone was sort of adopting this policy at the end of the 19th century. It was a point of high crisis for the British Empire, which had spread themselves very thin, right? It was the only one world government agency in the world in the 19th century. And so in India, where you had this big momentum to start building a lot of these big water projects to harness, because India has a lot of water, but a lot of starvation. So like, how could such a land of abundance have so much starvation? Well, again, it's controlled by the British. And so the British solution was, well, let's create a Ministry of Conservation that ended up putting 2/5 of India's surface area under conservation protected parks overseen by British Raj stooges that then said this area is not allowed to be touched by human economic activity because it's natural. It has some endangered species. And it worked so well at keeping India underdeveloped that it was then brought into the United States under Teddy Roosevelt, who then did the exact same thing with direct British assets who were installed all around him. This is a guy who thought the Confederacy was, a super romantic good thing. And he had his uncle, Bullock, James Bullock, was the Confederate, the head of the Confederacy operations in Europe. You can't make this stuff up. And he was mentored by Bullock, his James Bullock, and helped him co-write his memoirs. And Teddy was such a fanatically stupid person, a romantic who idolized the British Empire and really sought an idea of an Anglo-American special relationship. But he brought in all of these imperialists and people who admired the British Empire to shaping his conservation policy for the Western U.S. continent. And which is why all of the planned development projects that would involve the industrial development of the West, which was being planned by Lincoln's followers who were trying to continue the Transcontinental Railway project in the 1890s, all of that was stopped as there was this wall of no development permitted. So this was, again, done as part of the takedown from within of the United States spirit of progress and technological leaping over limits to growth, which is what characterized the best of Judeo-Christian civilization. It was brought into Germany ideologically, both from the standpoint of eugenics, but also the standpoint of nature conservation. And again, people forget, well, what would Hitler have done had he won the war? Is there any way to know? Hell yes, he wrote it down. There's actual letters where he documents what he wanted the world to look like. And it involved a world of decentralized communalistic structures, communalisms, which would be all locally managed from the standpoint of just like little mini micro democracies, which would then be under general broad frameworks of the Nazi high command that would have a territorial management of a slave colony called Russia and a big chunk of Eastern and Middle Europe. And they would co-manage with their Japanese fascist allies who would have their jurisdiction of most of Asia. They would use China as their slave colony. They would have, Italy would have their jurisdiction of a big chunk of North Africa and a certain amount of Southern Europe. And Britain would have, with their Anglo-American structures, a big, like most of North America, a big chunk of like India. Hitler even said India should be controlled by the British. He wanted the Anglo-Saxon master races to be the managerial elite of the world order, with maybe, 6 or 7 zones, regions, but all under the control of one unipolar authority, which would be the Bank of International Settlements, which provided for the growth of the Hitler machine under Hjalmar Schacht and Montague Norman of the Bank of England. That's what he wanted. But he ultimately wanted everything to be otherwise, just like today's, dystopic version of idiot democracies who celebrate us for being such great democracies. They got this idea of like everyone just, it's eco-democracy, like we'll just have like new urban management of everybody just having like being members of their local urban society in their 15-minute cities that you can then, look and you have this appearance of having democratic power because you could vote for your local mini authorities, but you have no power to change the structure of the 15-minute cities that are supposed to be little concentration camps with invisible cages splintered all over the world. That you're not allowed to challenge because the ultimate structure is actually still unipolar. It's a one world government. So that's exactly what Hitler wanted. And the fact that it failed had everything to do with the fact that you had still viable, organized patriots in the United States, especially, which overthrew this agenda on a number of fronts. So, on the one hand, I take power, I take inspiration from that because it shows me when I look at history from this lens, I realize that the oligarchy, which today wants what they want, which is what they've always wanted, which is global feudalism and a depopulated, dumbed down slave class of maybe 1 billion or so, they are not as powerful as they project. They brand themselves as if they had this immortal god type of power to them that could get whatever they want. But in fact, no, they've tried to do what they're trying now several times over the last century, and they have failed in the 1920s. They failed in 33. They failed in the 40s, and now they're just trying it again. But they're not that immutable. They've got serious Achilles heels and blind spots and weaknesses, and it has a lot to do, I think, also with their commitment to pseudoscientific structures that are not really scientific when you think about it for 2 seconds. Not only eugenics, but what eugenics is derived from, which is the imperial science of Darwinism, which itself is derived from the imperial science of Malthusianism. And there's a direct connection from Malthus to Darwin and Darwinism as models of explaining how systems should operate, to eugenics and social Darwinism, which are 2 sides of the same thing. To transhumanism and the modern ecology movement that's trying to put a value on reducing human impact on the environment, which ultimately will also involve implicitly killing off about a big chunk of 80-90% of the world population as a side effect, which they usually won't just outright say because then people would tend to not go along with that type of explicit language. So they have to say things like reducing our human carbon footprint or reducing fertilizer use to save nature or something like that.
They got to brand it so you'll digest it. They don't want to say we're going to kill half of you. That we're just going to have to reduce some carbon. It's hysterical.
To consume less, make do with less, adapt to scarcity, but still have a good life. Don't worry. We'll live good. We'll just be eating bugs, which are just the same as cows, except they're bugs. And maybe you won't own things, but you'll still live good. We promise. Don't rebel.
I don't want to get us sidetracked, but I got to throw in how this connects back to UNESCO and to, of course, Julian Huxley, where we see the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 now, and it's going to be rewilding. You see, there's this big map, and there's going to be these certain zones, coincidentally, where all the humans are, which they're going to be rewilded zones. And, I don't hate the National Park Service. I don't want to toss the baby out with the bathwater, but I got to throw in one of my least favorite presidents we mentioned earlier, Woodrow Wilson, with signing in our National Park Service, which was kind of like the preamble to the UNESCO rewilding gig. It was like, oh, it's going to be great. We're going to have parks and we'll just take land wherever we want. And then you guys can have what's left over. And that kind of goes into the UNESCO World Heritage Society, where you've got all these hugely important archaeological sites all over the globe, which are just now coincidentally the territory of UNESCO. So virtually, I don't even think there's an exception to this, but any archaeological site of relevance on the globe, if you look at their website or go to their lobby, it's going to have a nice little UNESCO plaque next to it saying you know, this isn't really yours. It's UNESCO's. It's Julian Huxley's grandchild, basically here.
That's crazy. Yeah, I didn't actually know about the archaeology take or the use of archaeology to create these heritage sites that would then be out of
the
the
World
the
Heritage
field
sites from
wild,
the Chichen Itza to the pyramids of Giza. It's all World Heritage sites.
Yeah, and like you as well, I'm not against conserving nature or conserving heritage sites. I don't think anybody is against conserving heritage sites or conserving and preserving nature or stopping pollution, right? Like those are all fine things. Those are common sense things that humans should be doing. The problem is when you introduce these deceitful agendas for doing it, not because they care about nature. Like, think Prince Bernhard and Prince Philip, who founded the World Wildlife Fund, honestly care about endangered species or conserving fauna and flora. They never cared. They were always big game hunters, like, looking to kill white rhinos. They don't
Exactly.
care about that. They care about the political effects of preventing nations from developing. So you can make sure that Nigeria doesn't develop a dam on a water system if you make sure that a big chunk of that wildlife region around which through which the river system flows is now all of a sudden a World Wildlife Fund nature conservatory that cannot thus be touched by human economic activity. Well, that's the effect, is that you keep them poor and thus more capable of being exploited by those very same mining companies. Like, look at, in Canada, you got this billionaire who recently died, who his name is Peter Munk. Peter Munk is the head of Barrick Gold, the founder and CEO of Barrick Gold, the world's biggest mining conglomerate. He was a founding member of the 1001 Nature Trust, set up by Prince Bernhard and Prince Philip in 1970 in order to raise more money for the World Wildlife Fund, which is designed to save more money, collect more money for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which always worked very closely with UNESCO to create a basis of new global empire. Now, Peter Munk, why is he working with these nature conservationists? Does he care about nature? No, he's got some of the most destructive mining operations in the world that utilize also massive slave labor in the form of child labor in Congo and other things. Sorry.
It's funny. I mean, if a mafia did this, it would be called money laundering. But I guess since it's a NGO running this, it's just a benevolent love fund that they just transfer money.
Yeah, exactly. It's all done under the cover of philanthropy, or you like British Royal Dutch Shell, one of the biggest petroleum firms in the world, had their CEO John Loudon in the 1960s act as the second president of the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, working very closely with Prince Philip and Bernhard. Why would the head of Royal Dutch Shell work against his own self-interest? Well, maybe it's because they actually don't even really care ultimately about making money in honest capitalism. They don't actually care about the very thing that they say that they do. Same thing for the billionaires at Davos. There's honest capitalists who go to Davos and who have gone to Davos since it was created as a platform for dialogue, as a junior branch of the Bilderberger Group. You'll find throughout those years people actually going there to network and to do business and to sign business deals. It's part of the game. But the organizers of it, top down, around Klaus Schwab, profess to be the representatives of capitalism, but yet they've done everything consistently to destroy the very basis of what makes capitalism viable for 50 years. So maybe they actually didn't care about capitalism. Maybe they just wanted to promote one perverse form of feudal capitalism that might use monetary structures in order to make people stupid, and to ultimately undermine the productive, viable part of capitalism, which is the industrial. Look at your construction firms, your small and medium businesses, which is where the incubators for new creative discoveries always existed. The smaller and medium agro-industrial farms that used to be the lifeblood of America and Canada in the 1950s and 60s. That's what's been destroyed under globalization. And the thing that we call capitalist globalization, which has been allowed to eat up and amalgamate, is just feudal capitalists like George Soros, speculators who just want to make money with money. They don't care about production, or Warren Buffett's, who are ultimately just using shell companies and certain derivatives or certain investment strategies in order to crush and destroy the small and medium enterprises and everything that they touch as part of a wealth transfer strategy towards a corporate supranational elite, which all have to be inducted into some weird common way of thinking about governing the Untermenschen, the underhumans of the world in Plato's cave, like some weird digital drug-infused version of Plato's cave of 2,000 years ago. They just want to use, like Yuval Harari states, what do we do with the new global useless class that are going to be made irrelevant because of automation, which is itself not even going to happen because they're not even using automation in any way that involves making life better for people. Because I'm okay with automation if you're going to apply it in a way that alleviates people from doing cyclical brain dead work in order for them to actually have a life that is satisfying and full of abundance, and they can do work, mental work and creative work, and not be physical human cows. That's great. But Yuval Harari and his controllers don't care about using automation that way, but they say, what do we do with the new global useless class of truck drivers who are going to be out of jobs because, we'll have self-driving trucks, as if that's even close to happening, which is not. Well, drugs and video games. He says, some combination of those two things are going to make people satisfied while they wait for their euthanasia pill.
It's that Soma from Brave New World. They just got to Soma out until they get in their execution pod, like Canada's rolling out.
Yeah, and then become like tomorrow's meal for our kids with their Soylent Green, right?
Yeah,
perfect closed cycles. Just they want to put closed systems, closed cycles everywhere as a big joke. Sorry for the language, but it's really it's a sick joke. At the end of the day, it has no bearing in reality, and I think that's the thing when you look at what they're using to justify this, as you pointed out, H.G. Wells, like there are these sacred cow high priests of the New World Order that might be physically dead, but still exert an influence in having crafted a battle plan that would be a bit of a long game that was really implemented after World War II, when the first New World Order, or the third New World Order project failed. And people just need to read H.G. Wells' Open Conspiracy or his New World Order in 1940, or read his Things to Come. It's the fact that he's writing these things as nonfiction, but also look at his fiction work from this lens, because his fiction work is also early revolutionary predictive programming. It's having a direct impact upon the broad zeitgeist and our collective imagination of the type of future we think is natural. And he's shaping people when you're getting fiction. This is why the CIA has put so much effort into funding Hollywood and the different shows. You think you're watching Netflix to be entertained and not be influenced by political agendas? Sorry, no. Throughout the entire
culture
Cold
construction.
War, there's always agendas out there, and you're taking more of it into your subconscious, because your sentinels of reason go down when you're being entertained in the form of fiction. You're giving a story, and there's now Trojan horses that are coloring your idea of what human nature is. What is the nature of the world that is coming into being? And if you think that a dystopic world of either, look, it's all post-apocalyptic movies that are being promoted, or shows that are post-apocalyptic on Netflix, or Hunger Games, like things that you have to like fight and kill your rival in order to survive at all costs. Like, all of these things are coloring your identity, and you're going to be that much more inclined to adapt to these artificial, unnatural, evil structures if they come into being, rather than do what natural humans do, which is stop evil. Like, you see something unnatural that's threatening you and your children in your broader society, normal, natural human beings acting with their conscience and reason tied to their imagination together naturally will tend to intervene to resist. That doesn't happen so much. It dampens it when you have this type of engineering. And H.G. Wells is an evil, brilliant, who really innovated a big chunk of this. And his affiliation with Bertrand Russell, with the Fabian Society, which operated always through the London School of Economics, that always interfaced closely with the Roundtable movement that operated out of Oxford around Cecil Rhodes, Lord Milner, and that whole grouping of what became Lord Milner's kindergarten. It's two different branches of the exact same imperial operation to infiltrate, permeate everything you can, public, private, business, media, just permeate, and try to undermine, like a virus taking over a healthy cell from within, undermine target systems and induce the target victim to destroy themselves from within,
Yeah.
right? And you do that through a variety of techniques that are not that difficult to understand, but it's very difficult to understand for people like in our world because we're saturated in it. We have to sort of remove ourselves a little bit intellectually from the very conditioning of our school and cultural ecosystems and look down from above, and just see how this is the exact same thing that was used to induce the destruction of Athens in ancient Greece with the infusion of the sophists, the organization of the various mystery religions that were organized through the cult of Apollo at Delphi, that people like Plato were trying to expose in various ways through his dialogues or through his academy, and the network of statesmen who worked through his academy to try to do battle geopolitically with this organized system of inbred empire that used drug cults. That's what the cult of Apollo at Delphi was. It was a drug cult that controlled military machinery around the world, and people would come from around the world to pay money to the priests to interpret what this doped up priestess of the Pythian priestess was going to mutter out in a doped up frenzy, and then they would interpret that for those who had the money to pay whatever general or king wanted to know. Do I make an alliance? Do I go to war? What do I do? And they had full control as the nerve centers of intelligence of the ancient world, as well as of banking, because they were collecting tons of money that they were then able to loan out at interest with usury and other things, making people more dependent upon them. And also the deployment of various epistemological warfare operations under the form of the sophists that were then infused into brainwashing the young elite of Athens into thinking that they had knowledge they didn't actually have, because they had only the art of persuasion, which was revived with Edward Bernays. And the idea of like making the unreal look real, or making the real look unreal, or making the right seem wrong. And there's an art to that, which is exposed again by anybody who wants to get a sense of this. I suggest read Plato's dialogues and see how he's exposing the fallacies of the art of the arts of sophistry by just getting people to question the underlying assumptions that are unexamined. When you're being put into a hypnotic trance by a sophist, part of it involves getting you to agree to certain core assumptions that you do not examine and that you then start building upon, which in the course of Plato's dialogues, it's always examine your assumptions, go to the core, and by doing that, you can exercise not only humility, but you start discovering what you thought you knew you don't know, but now you're free to discover what you didn't know through humility, right? You discover the type of emotional spirit that is needed to make a discovery and thus leap above the limits to growth. And the whole thing is that the mental, intellectual limits to our mind there's a connection between the metaphysical limits of the mind world and the physical world that limits us materially based upon the lack of discoveries we have not, or the discoveries we have yet to make in nature. And so our dependence upon earlier forms of knowledge or resources that are, let's say, increasingly monopolized by agencies that want to get us to fight over diminishing returns in a world of scarcity. This goes back to, this is all of human history.
Yeah.
So it took a discovery process, a spirit of love of truth, of discovery, of humility, to discover how, let's say, iron could become something useful from an age before the Iron Age, where iron was just a useless rock. It wasn't something you could use for good or for bad. It was just a rock, but it became an ore because of the metaphysical eureka. But if you just then stayed on that new platform, dependent now upon iron, and never aspired to anything more, well, it's only a matter of time before all of the iron deposits would be then monopolized by an agency that had the power to do so, to then induce neighbors to fight each other for diminishing returns of whatever, or wood or whatever. So that's the thing. It's, the mind-body connection has been obscured as all hell, and that has allowed us to then accept the idea that conspiracy theories are a sign that you're stupid. Everybody knows that conspiracy theories don't exist. We're not smart enough to keep a secret, let alone over many generations. That's impossible. Everybody knows everything is just done by corruption and stupidity for material desires. That's all that animates human civilization. Don't you know? bull. Like, I mean, that's a sign that people have been brainwashed.
And it's all cyclical. I mean, it's kind of ironic that we're ending on the same note that we began, but I mean, we touched on at the very beginning today, World War I, the Great War was nothing more than a big shock doctrine for the American people and the global citizenry at large. I mean, I often refer to Naomi Klein's work, The Shock Doctrine, and I think that's exactly what World War I was. It was sort of the setup to get everybody, as you mentioned, to accustomed to accepting fascism and feudalism and so forth. And I always point back to 9/11 as being another beginning of a shock doctrine, because since then, you know, you just mentioned we've had, I'd say 20 years after 9/11, we've had at least 20 years of just dystopian movies, television shows, everything. It's all going to end. It's all horrible. You mentioned so many of them, but it's all sort of the same thing. And I'm thinking it's all sort of setting us up, because the brain doesn't really differentiate. It's watching a movie from real life. I mean, it does to a degree, but your brain's sort of soaking all that in when you're in that hypnagogic state, you're in that alpha state, your brain's just sort of soaking it all in. And then immediately when these different dystopian-esque events are going to come to pass, your brain's going to go, okay, well, I know this because I saw it in this movie and that movie and the previous movie. You know, it's gone so far from World War I because they have such a monopolization of control. You know, World War I, they had the radio. Now they've got streaming services, and you can have TV in your car and at the house and in the office. You're inundated, super saturated with this sort of, you know, Orwellian books and movies that they would have only dreamed of, you know, in the early 1920s there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the best way to inoculate oneself from this is first knowledge of it. You know, I used to be addicted to TV, you know, and when I was in high school, I was watching way too many movies and TV, and I could feel myself kind of rotting away psychologically. I knew it wasn't healthy, but the adrenaline rush of watching movies and TV shows was really heavy. And then it was only at a certain point when I became increasingly concerned or aware of the broader political manipulations of my world and of history that I became more self-aware of the type of shackles that I was imposing on myself by giving into it. But by being then aware, I then had a whole bunch of useful reference points and techniques I could then use to cut myself off of the thing that now made me disgusted. Because when I was ignorant, I couldn't be disgusted with my addiction to this type of escapism. Same thing for you know, I had friends, including myself, we smoked a lot of weed for a long time. And, you know, for young people, you can't blame them. The world is an ugly, hypocritical place. And it's kind of spiritually painful to be in this type of unnatural world and being told to be a good citizen and just adapt to the standards of this world. And, you know, it's not a surprise then you want to like escape through whatever kind of drug you have available to you. Makes sense. But when then you realize how the same operatives who created this disgusting world of empire and of injustice also are at the heart of promoting of drug money laundering, promoting the entire drug culture, the music that glorifies the drug culture is itself being directly patronaged by those same agencies that also want to reduce the world population. And to do that requires that they cut you off willingly of your spiritual, moral, intellectual genius that we all have as babies. And they want to numb that and get us to numb it ourselves, which is the best way to enslave people, is to get them to want the things that are actually their enslavement, but you call it freedom, right? The concentration camp without tears that Aldous Huxley talks about in his Ultimate Revolution speech at Berkeley. It's the same thing. You get them to want that which is it's Orwellian, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to the British Dutch East Indian Trading Company and the Golden Triangle and that opium trade too.
It's the same thing. Yeah, HSBC as well. It emerged in 1865 as a drug money center to process drug money from the opium wars and from the continuing opium trade that the British had used. As part of an interconnected web internationally, as you called it. You had the Golden Triangle, you had the Silver Triangle, one coming in through Canada, one through Cambodia, Laos, that was then developed throughout the Cold War. It never ended. HSBC kept doing what it was set out to do in 1865, and it was found guilty in 2012 under the Senator Carl Levin hearings for having laundered hundreds of billions of dollars of drug money laundering, and it never stopped after 2012. It paid like a $1 billion fine, got an auditor for 5 years who's now no longer there, never did a job anyway while he was there in their London headquarters. And people are like, oh yeah, it's the Chinese takeover. Hong Kong Shanghai Bank is taken over, and this is their revenge for the opium wars against us. And it's like, it's a London-based operation. It's always been out to destroy both the U.S. as well as China. It still controls a big chunk of the Hong Kong currency printing. It's still the HSBC. It's labeled a foreign enemies bank by China for the last 2 years. But it's a British foreign agency that's part of an international deep state operation out to kill everybody. It's not any one nation that manages these things, including British people, right? This is what ousted Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour, the anti-war, anti-City of London Republican Labour leader in 2018, Jeremy Corbyn. This guy was a good guy. Who was it who labeled him a Russian agent and flushed his career and undermined him? He almost became Prime Minister of Britain. He represented the actual interests of the British people. But this thing, just like we saw with Charles Dickens, read The Tale of Two Cities or Oliver Twist, he pointed it out too, that this agency is more than happy killing its own British people. They're happy killing Irish white people. They're happy killing black people in Africa. They're happy killing Chinese. They're happy killing any. They just want to create a global system. This is all they really want at the end of the day, is a system of global feudalism where everybody knows their role as either a master or a slave. If you're a slave class, then you don't use your mind. You're a happy talking cow eating cud while you wait to be processed in the meat packing facility. And if you're one of the master inbred elites with better genes, well, then you're going to be able to have your orgies in your castle and not be challenged. And that's just the crystallized order forever of what they want. And that's it. That's all they want. Is it so hard to satisfy what they want? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like that's really it's that pathetic and desperate and unnatural. And I think that's also why we should have a little bit of optimism about this, because they're always doing this. Parasite is always acting in defiance of natural law, and which is why every time they get close to attaining what they desire as far as maximum controls in the material world, at least, they always create structures that blow up in their face. And it doesn't even benefit the inner elite, upper level managers. It doesn't even benefit them. They end up having a scramble. It takes them a few centuries to sort of like reorganize, move themselves from Rome as a center of command to Venice, and then try to slowly reconstruct and try to bring back their past greatness, maybe with a few new modifications, until it blows up in their face again in the League of Cambrai of 1509, and then they realize shit, that didn't work, and then they got to re-scramble, move to the Netherlands, and then reconstruct their system again, and then take over Britain, and then now use that as the basis of a new geopolitical center of operation and try to reconstruct again with new modifications until that blows up in their face. And then you got a Hitler machine that starts going all Frankenstein monster, and then they can't control that. It blows up in their face again. Abort, reach. So it's like you're dealing with a system that's really kind of pathetic and manically repetitive and cyclical in their own lack of commitment to anti-creativity. Mm-hmm. Rather than simply accept the fact that they're operating on a false hypothesis of the way the universe actually works. They're so incapable of self-examining their own core assumptions that they're just going to redo what they do again and again until finally humanity is able to organize ourselves in such a way that finally makes it impossible for them to get their fangs back into the victim, which I think to a certain degree is happening in an interesting way with the Eurasian development process going on, which is an interesting phenomenon I haven't seen before. So maybe that's the topic for a future conversation, because I know we have to.
That's the truth, man. Good grief. We have got to do this more often, Matthew. My goodness, man. I love talking to you.
Yeah, this is fun. Cool.
Where's the best place people can find your work and help you? And I want to know more at some point about the Rising Tide Foundation. We got to talk about that off the air or something. That sounds amazing also.
Yeah, man. Sure. Well, they can go to risingtidefoundation.net. We'll give people direct access to the written and video multimedia work that my wife and I have been doing with our collaborators. We do weekly expert seminars as well every Sunday. Right now, we're on a Science Unshackled symposium for 9 weeks. We just had something on the fallacy of man-made global warming by a leading climate expert. Before that, I mean, we're going to have some
some consistently interesting topics that people can tune into. Live Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And if they want to register, can just send me an email at info@risingtidefoundation.net. If they want to buy our books, so my wife and I, we've written a bunch of books, recasting a lot of this history, pretty fun. So those can all be easily found on canadianpatriot.org, including our newest piece, which is called Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops, since a lot of better people of the conservative groupings of the world have really been targeted for a psychological manipulation by the Five Eyes and intelligence agencies to become a weaponized mob preparing or championing the idea of a war with China. So we try to debunk a lot of the myths being promoted in mainstream and even alternative media right now around what we're being fed about what China is, and what's actually taken over the West, which is not Russia, it's not China, it's something else. So that's a new thing that people can also see on the Canadian Patriot website.
That sounds wonderful, man. Well, if you'll stick around for a second, I'll close things up here and say goodbye to you off the air.
Sure.
All right. Sounds wonderful. All right, folks, if you missed any of that, shame on you. Check out anomicage.com. You're going to find all things me, this show, all the past shows, information breakdown segments, all that good stuff at anomicage.com. As I always say, you can't do everything, but you can do something. So please try to get out there and do your part. Till next time, I'll be seeing you sooner than later in the Anomic Age.
Thank you for listening to The Anomic Age, a John Age project. For past shows, further info, and to comment, go to anomicage.com. That's ANOMICAGE.com. Till next time, thank you for listening to The Anomic Age.